Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here, and I do thank deeply to the same two people we named before, Professor Mogisi and Professor Rahnema. It's a worthy cause, and we'll try to contribute as much as we can. Since the establishment of the Republic of Turkey in 1923, the Turkish foreign policy has been based on two fundamental principles. One, peace in the nation and peace in the world, as specifically stated by the founder of the Republic, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. And two, orientation towards and alliances with the West. In fact, Turkey's role as one of the founding members of the United Nations, her membership in NATO and the Council of Europe, and her persistence in the last more than 25 years to join the European Union as a full member are the result of these principles. Throughout the rule of the single-party system, up until 1946, and during the multi-party system after that, Turkish foreign policy followed the same course. Turkey conducted her policies toward her neighbors, however, with caution. Quite different, or quite often I should say, because of her recognition of the state of Israel immediately after its formation, and her good relations with that state. In the subsequent years, Turkey was severely criticized by its Arab Muslim neighbors. From 1960 to 1980, Turkey experienced 3 military coups. These, as argued by the military, which assumed as its traditional role and responsibility the maintenance of internal stability and security of the country as well, all were directed against the incompetence and constant bickering of the political parties, as well as the threat began to be presented by the Muslim political groups. During these military governments, or under the shadow of military, whichever government came to power, as long as they committed to long existence policies of Western orientation, Ankara was approved by Western powers. The coup of 1980, which took very harsh measures against leftist, rightist groups, both of them, was greeted with great deal of understanding in the American government circles. Over the last few years, political relations between the US and Turkey developed in a completely different direction from those between Turkey and Europe. With Europe, it was reasonably uncomfortable, more specifically with the EC countries, where Turkey was an associate member, and Council of Europe, because attention focused on the human rights conditions in Turkey. While in the United States, the concern was security. That the European organizations focus on human rights so much have two reasons. One, proximity of the country to Europe, and second, political refugees, thousands of them residing in Europe, began influencing the European governments. Turkey's trade relations, however, with Europe were not affected. Trade with EC countries improved vastly, more important than Turkish trade with the United States. From 1983 onwards, political relations with EC improved as the EC grew impatient with Greek policies over Cyprus. Turkey officially applied for full membership in the European Union in April 1987. While the European Union did not really outright reject Turkish application, its reply to Turkey amounted to rejection, at least for the time being. And today, after 25 years, Turkey is still waiting at the door. The situation in the Middle East in the years 1980, 1988 was dominated first by the Iranian Revolution and then by the Iran-Iraq War. The Turkish military government of 1980-1983 regarded the Islamic Republic of Iran with suspicion, fearing the influence of Iran on the Islamic groups in Turkey. New Iranian government's attacks on Mustafa Kemal and his policies did not help. And the Turkish opinion was offended when a very high-level visiting Iranian representative refused to lay a wreath, a customary practice of foreign dignitaries, at Atatürk's mausoleum. Nevertheless, Turkey maintained a scrupulously observed policy of neutrality during the war. Iran, which was suffering from American trade embargo, became Turkey's foremost export market in 1983 and 1984. But at the same time, Turkey allowed Iraq to pump oil through the double pipeline over its territory to a Mediterranean port. During this period, Turkey's relations with Israel continued on friendly terms, and Ankara's approach to her Middle Eastern neighbors could be described as diplomatically correct, yet again cautious. At this time, two more important regional developments challenged Turkey and or offered opportunities to Ankara. First, the collapse of the Soviet bloc during 1989-1991 period held both promises and dangers for Turkey. Relations between Turkey and the Soviet Union, especially in the economic field, had been quite successful and indeed expanding. Particularly during the period of perestroika established by President Gorbachev. Between 1987 and 1990, 30 different agreements were concluded regarding trade with Russia, and the trade increased from $350 million a year to $1.9 billion. The acute economic crisis, which developed in Russia and its successor states in 1990, could indeed endanger Turkish economy as well. But Turkey escaped that threat. Turkey aimed at strengthening its relations with the emerging Turkic republics in Central Asia: Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. With American support, it tried to present itself as a role model, a Turkish Muslim country with democratic pluralism and a free market economy, in competition with Iran and in competition with Saudi Arabia. Both were active in Central Asia. In fact, Iran was sending some missionaries. Saudi Arabia was sending cases and cases of the Quran, and Turkey was shipping typewriters in, of course, modern Turkish alphabet to influence them. In March 1991, then President Turgut Özal toured Russia and a number of Turkish republics and launched a plan of cooperation, economic and political cooperation. Although the Turkic republics were attracted what they saw in Turkey, the leaders of the Central Asian republics did not find it much alluring to have one very strong uncle they got rid of a few months ago to be replaced by a big brother, Turkey. Yes, Ankara's relations with the newly dependent republics were friendly, but Turkey was not able to turn this friendship, these relations, to its advantage as she perceived them, except in some economic activity particularly related to construction. Ankara's emphasis on common Turkic background did not create the unity it sought. The second important political development which affected Turkey at that time, that enormous changes in the landscape of the Balkans. Former Yugoslav republics of Bosnia-Herzegovina and Macedonia immediately sought close relations with Turkey. The new government, which came to power in Bulgaria, had the help of a party at home, which was supported by the large number of Turkish minority living in Bulgaria. This led to a very serious improved relations between Bulgarian-Turkish governments. Albania, which had been the only Balkan country to have consistently good relations with Turkey, in spite of its hardline Marxist regimes over the years, continued its good relations with Turkey. Indeed, Turkey received a group of Albanian officers to be trained in the Turkish army. All in all, Turkey's influence in the Balkans, in the Black Sea region, and to a good degree in the Central Asia region, had increased. In the Middle East, the Ankara was cautiously cultivating its relations with its neighbors. Forgive my voice, please. But Ankara refrained from interjecting itself into the acrimonious policies of the region and chose to play its role within Europe. The Turkish nation state seemed based on solid foundations, even if ideological consensus about the way it should develop culturally and socially seemed quite far between the political parties. Yet, despite this, political landscape has shown remarkable long-term stability. Ever since the establishment of the military party, or multi-party politics in Turkey, 45-46, the voters really went for right of center party, which could command between 50 and 60% of the votes, and a bloc which may be termed left of center, which received approximately 30 to 40% of the vote. Radical politics, whether based on Marxism, fundamentalism, or Turkish version of fascism, have all remained marginal and were more important as in their effects on other major political parties than on their own. During the 1990s, various coalition governments in Turkey could not provide any meaningful economic success and social stability. It is more than anything else, along with its appeal to Islamic sentiments of majority of the Turks, which influenced the voters to support a newly formed party, Justice and Development Party, AK Party in Turkish. In 2002 elections, they won the government. The party was established by a wide range of politicians, a moderate segment of the highly religious Virtue Party, a socially conservative Motherland Party of former President Turgut Özal, and some nationalists. The religious orientation of the party was very clear from the beginning, but they exposed their ideology as a conservative democratic party on moral and social issues, but liberal on economic issues and committed to free enterprise. The AK Party won an overwhelming majority in 2002 general elections, capturing 2/3 of the seats in the Grand National Assembly, under the leadership of Abdullah Gül, today's president. Tayyip Erdogan, prime minister now, who had been imprisoned and banned from politics for reading in public a religiously expressed political poem, would only be able to get elected a year later, take his seat in the parliament, and almost immediately become prime minister. As a result of a number of structural reforms in the economy and financial institutions and carefully devised economic policies, AK Party was successful to eliminate hyperinflation and bring it down to 8.8% by 2004. In 2007 elections, under the slogan, "Don't stop, keep going," AK Party received 46.6% of the votes and once again kept a strong majority in the parliament, 341 members out of 550. During the 2002-2007, AK Party maintained the traditional guidelines of Turkish foreign policy, keeping close ties with the West, in fact, making strong efforts to harmonize the requirements set by the European Union for admission. After the 2007 elections, its approach has changed. It was now being guided by the concept of strategic depth, developed and elaborated by Tayyip Erdogan's longtime foreign affairs advisor, Ahmet Davutoğlu. The Turkish government, after 2007, began focusing on its neighbors with the stated intention of becoming a dominant and stabilizing force. The official policy now was zero problem with all neighbors. Again, a principle developed by Ahmet Davutoğlu. In the victory speech after the last elections in 2011, Erdogan proudly began by saluting friends and brotherly nations from Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, Amman, Cairo, Sarajevo, Baku, and Nicosia. That's how he began his speech. And he continued. The Middle East, the Caucasus, and the Balkans have won as much as Turkey. Clearly, he was indicating that Turkey intended to play a crucial role in international affairs, at least within its old imperial borders. I'm running out of time, I think. So let me jump and get to Turkey's relations with the Middle East. Despite the fact that Turkey kept close relations with the United States, and to somewhat a lesser degree with Europe, two things worried the West. First, Turkish relations with Israel soured and eventually reached a point of non-cooperation in a number of economic and military agreements. This began with Israel's move against Hamas in Gaza in December 2008 and January 2009. Subsequently, highly critical remarks made by Tayyip Erdogan at Davos against Israel, multiplied by the invasion of a Turkish ship on the way to humanitarian aid to Gaza in the spring of 2010 and the death of 8 Turkish citizens. Second, Erdogan's repeated statement that Ankara considered Sudan as its main partner in Africa, despite Khartoum's harsh policies towards Darfur, raised serious questions in London, Paris, and Bonn, as well in Washington, of course. His support for President Bashir during his visit to Sudan in 2006, invitation of Sudanese officials to Turkey in 2008-2009, and his declaration that, with great deal of emphasis, Israel's action in Gaza was much worse than what had happened in Darfur, raised serious questions in the West. He made a remark recently, and he said, what genocide? Not referring to Armenian genocide, other genocides. What genocide? Muslims do not commit genocide, he said. Okay. A couple of more minutes, I should finish. Uprising in Arab countries for reform and change tested Turkey's resolve for democratic political system. For Egypt, at a very early age, Erdogan called Hosni Mubarak a number of times and strongly urged him to change his policies. And finally, in early February 2011, called for his resignation, making Erdogan, believe it or not, the first world leader directly to do so. Some interpreted this, with good reason, as a result of Mubarak's oppression of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, with which AK Party had some affinity. In Libya, Ankara hesitated to support people's movement at first. In fact, both Erdogan and his foreign minister Davutoglu criticized the United Nations and discouraged NATO of any action against Gaddafi. Certainly, billions of investments, Turkish investment in Libya, had some effect on this decision. Later, after their concerns were satisfied by France, England, and US, they joined them, not in action, but in support. The Turkish-Syrian relations were seriously strained owing to Damascus government's support for PKK, Kurdish Workers' Party, a group which Turkey long declared a terrorist group. And in 1998, war was almost inevitable between the two nations. But once the leader of PKK expelled from Syria, relations became very, very friendly. In the following years, Erdogan developed very close relations with Syrian government. And during this recent uprising, summer of 2011, Erdogan repeatedly called Bashir Assad and asked him to calm down. He sent his foreign minister a number of times pleading with him, to no avail. Well, as far as Erdogan was concerned now, Assad was not listening to his big brother. And this is typical Erdogan. If you don't listen to him, he takes action. And sure enough, he came against Syria. There is no question that no problems with any neighbor, zero problem with any neighbor in Turkey is really not working. Turkish interests are not identical with the interests of its neighbors. Turkey has a problem with Greece. Turkey has a problem with Azerbaijan because Azeris think that they are not supporting them strongly enough against Armenia. Some traditional problems exist between Armenia and Turkey. Turkey and Iran are quite suspicious of each other. Iraq, Turkey, is problems still about the Kurdish issue. Now Syria and Turkey coming very strongly, has problems. Cyprus, Turkey has a problem. So the neighbors are, in Russia, suspicion. Good relations, but suspicion. So that zero problem with neighbors is not working. One thing happened, however, under AK Party in Turkey. Turkey is no longer considers itself lost between the East and West, or so terribly worried that they won't be able to join the European Union. They really declare their independence. Strong economy, determined government, although questionable social policies, as far as I'm concerned. Turkey still intends to play a very important and serious role in the Middle East, in the entire Islamic world. And one reason Turkey, still under this government, is waiting at the door of European Union, is if Turkey is admitted, it will be the only Muslim country, and it would be the spokesperson for 15 million Muslims living in Europe. I will stop here. Forgive me if I did. My voice is awful.
Thank you for a very interesting lecture. I'm especially interested in coming from the Communalities of the Balkans as well. But I'm not a very good Muhtaseba, I'm sorry. I put my foot down very strongly. Our next speaker is Professor Sedef Arat-Koç from Ryerson University, who will be talking on Neo-Ottomanism and Turkey's new place in the Middle East, democratic illusions and imperial delusions? Question mark.
I would also like to express my thanks to Haide Mogisi and to Said Rahima. This is indeed a very good forum for me to present this paper. It's an environment where I'm learning a lot from others and am hoping to receive some feedback on my work also. Professor Turgay has already given some background to the topic that I'm talking on. My presentation will focus specifically on more recent developments in Turkey, and I will be discussing these developments in light of two themes that we are addressing in this conference. One will be the question of imperialism. I think we don't have an agreement on that question. And the second theme that I will touch on and not develop perhaps long enough will be the theme of democracy. Shortly after the invasion of Iraq in 2003, Leo Panitch and Sam Gindon wrote that American imperialism had become too unconcealed in its coercive nature at home as well as abroad to remain sustainable. They mentioned the unattractiveness of an empire so flagrantly imperial, so blatantly imperialistic, that it had provoked unprecedented levels of opposition worldwide, including in core capitalist countries. It has not just been anti-imperialist Marxist scholars who have raised questions about the sustainability of imperial hegemony. With the glaring loss of US hegemony in the Middle East through the first decade of the 21st century, there has been an acknowledgement of the problems of a naked, unilateral, hard power imperialism in foreign policy circles and attempts to find new images of a benign imperialism. I will argue that the fig leaf for the much needed legitimacy for US-based Western imperialism may be in part being provided recently by a rather unexpected source in the form of aspirations for imperial revival in another country in the Middle East itself. Focusing on the case of what has been dubbed Neo-Ottoman shift in Turkish foreign policy, one of the questions that this paper will deal with will be to look at the shift in developments in Turkey and to question whether Turkey is developing necessarily as an independent regional power or rather a sub-imperial subcontractor to Western imperialism. First, let me say a few things about Neo-Ottomanism. Neo-Ottomanism is based on a conservative conception of Turkish identity and history, which aspires for Turkey to return to and pursue the path of its Ottoman past. As the construction of national identity in Republican Turkey since the 1920s was based on a rather abrupt break with the Ottoman past until recently, the popularization of this Ottomanist ideology and nostalgia has been rather limited until recently, more or less confined to some conservative circles. Neo-Ottomanism has several different dimensions. Some of it is cultural nostalgia to certain architectural forms and so on. But the part or the dimension of Neo-Ottomanism that I am interested in for this paper is the shift in foreign policy in Turkey. Specifically, a pronounced and ambitious shift in Turkish foreign policy that expresses aspirations to political leadership and economic expansion in countries and regions formerly part of the Ottoman Empire. Considered by some as representing a new geographic imagination and a civilizational geopolitics, Neo-Ottomanism advocates such expansion on the basis of geographic proximity as well as a common history and cultural identity. I think it is important to acknowledge and recognize that even dimensions of Neo-Ottomanism that specifically focus on foreign policy are not just about foreign policy. The recent rise to popularity of an otherwise marginal Ottomanist perspective corresponds historically to a period in Turkey of political and ideological crisis of Kemalism, and economically to a period of growth and higher aspirations of Turkish capitalists for regional and global expansion. Neo-Ottomanism involves a reconceptualization of Turkish identity, a radical rethinking and assessment of modern Turkish history, including the place of Kemalism in it, a reassessment of Turkish secularism, and a new approach to addressing the Kurdish question. Unlike reactions to the rise of other imperial powers, such as other potential imperial powers, such as China, the Western reactions to Neo-Ottomanism, as I see them, has been largely positive. Even though one of the early Western perspectives on Neo-Ottomanism has been an alarmist one, interpreting what looked a few years ago like closer ties with Syria, Iran, and Russia as a sign of Turkey changing sides, shifting axes, basing its policy on an anti-Western Islamism. Most Western observers have interpreted the shift positively, minimally in cautious optimism, or more in congratulatory terms. They see it as a shift from what they characterize as a cautious, risk-averse insulationism of the Republican regime, so far considered aloof to its neighbors, to an approach that is daring, proactive, and positively engaged with the Middle East. How do we make sense of these positive interpretations of Neo-Ottomanism in Western countries? My argument is that Neo-Ottomanism might have provided one of the culturally suitable solutions for sustainability of empire, as anti-American reactions have intensified in the Middle East against George Bush's unilateralism. Even as the clash of civilizations perspective, initially used to sell US wars to Americans and to Europeans, has become less popular, alternatives have been sought in other culturalist solutions. In the Middle East, this has been in the form of a Muslim outreach and defining and constructing the good Muslim, which could simultaneously serve as a model to other Muslims and be palatable to Western interests at the same time. In the immediate after of 9/11, there was an emphasis on the secularism that the Turkish model represented. Later, there has been a shift to the moderate Islamic qualities and that Turkey could represent, and the way Turkey is seen as to have successfully articulated Islam with democracy and neoliberal capitalism. As Yeşilyurt and Akdevelioğlu point out, Turkey's significance for the West is not simply based on Turkey passively serving the image of a model country. More importantly, it has been the ability of Turkey to serve as soft power, inspiring and enabling change in the absorption of other Middle Eastern countries in the new international order. Here, I argue, it has been Neo-Ottomanism which makes changes in Turkey's foreign policy directions appear independent and authentic to Turkey itself, that has helped with the creation of a more convincing and legitimate image for both Turkish and other publics in the Middle East. Since its so-called Neo-Ottoman shift, Turkish foreign policy has involved a number of gestures, postures, and rhetorics which have made a convincing impression on the peoples of Turkey and other Middle Eastern countries that Turkey is pursuing an independent path. Most important among these gestures is the one mentioned by Professor Turgay already, the walking out at the Davos conference by Prime Minister Erdogan, and the way the Turkish government has supported the trip of the Turkish flotilla Mavi Marmara in Gaza, to Gaza. Also important to this image has been Turkey establishing and maintaining friendly relations and strong political, diplomatic, economic, and cultural ties with Syria, Iran, countries which have otherwise been isolated in the Middle East. It has not just been the Turkish government that has tried to present an image of independence in their foreign policy. It has also been common in the public talk of American foreign policy circles to refer to the new policies of Turkey as independent. Graham Fuller, longtime employee with the Rand Corporation, longtime employee of the US State Department and the CIA, now serving as a senior analyst with the Rand Corporation, wrote in 2008 that letting Turkey be Turkey would provide much more value to long-term US interests than pressuring Turkey to meet short-term US needs. As much as this might become complicating and irritating for the United States, and might work in ways that partially dilutes and complicates Turkey's relationship with the West, Fuller argued that it would also enrich and complement this relationship. Fuller explained that this optimism was based on the changing perceptions and potential influence of Turkey in the region. He said, in its new, more independent mode, Turkey is no longer perceived regionally as a mere Western wannabe. It is now for the first time being viewed positively within the Muslim world as a state worth watching and maybe even emulating. Fuller points out that Turkey's value to the West would be in terms of facilitating communication with Washington and Jerusalem and helping reduce the sense of isolation and siege among Arabs. The possibility of Turkey achieving these roles, however, would be directly proportional to its perception as an independent country. To quote Fuller again, he says, to the extent that Turkey continues to be perceived as an instrument of US policy and power, Ankara's credibility and access to the region will be highly diminished. The respect given to Ankara rises almost in direct proportion to the extent to which it is perceived as an independent power. If a demonstrably independent Turkey advocates certain policy discourses in the Arab world, it will be listened with greater attention than its old, strictly Western aligned self. I would like to highlight that in the last decade, despite occasional gestures of defiance Turkey has demonstrated, it has participated in several major US and Western initiatives in the region. First, Turkey has been a part of the Afghan war. And even though it has voted with a small margin against active collaboration with the US in the war and occupation of Iraq, it has allowed, through several agreements with the US, to transit for US military flights to Iraq from the Incirlik base. It has also been complicit in CIA's extraordinary rendition program by allowing the use of Incirlik base for transit and refueling of planes. Even the closer ties with Iran and Syria until last year can be interpreted or have been interpreted by some as communicating Western messages and demands than as representations of Turkey's independent policy. In the last year and a half, since the start of the so-called Arab Spring, there is a shift, a new shift in Turkey's foreign policy, I would argue, from soft power to aspiring warrior. With regional developments in 2011, Turkey has significantly shifted its policies in the Middle East to be in closer alignment with Western interests. We have seen it clearly with the shift in Turkey's position during the anti-Gaddafi uprisings in Libya, and more recently with the increased aggressiveness in its position in relation to Syria. In relation to Libya, the turnabout in Turkey's position has been very striking. On February 28, 2011, Prime Minister Erdogan stated that NATO intervention in Libya would be pure nonsense and questioned what Libya had anything to do with Libya. Less than a month later, however, on March 21, 2011, he expressed a very different position, saying NATO should intervene in Libya to ensure that Libya belongs to the Libyans. In relation to Syria, Turkey has initially continued in a mediator role, asking the Syrian government to reform, yielding to the demands of protesters, but it has rapidly escalated the tone and nature of its intervention. By August 2011, the Turkish government was not hesitant in directly challenging Syrian sovereignty, when Prime Minister Erdogan said, "We do not see the Syrian issue as an external affair. The Syrian question is our internal affair. Because we share with them a border of 850 kilometers, we have ties of kinship, history, and culture. Therefore, we cannot passively watch what is happening. We need to do whatever is necessary." Most recently, there is an interesting quotation that I would like to share with you from Foreign Minister Davutoğlu, who in late April this year made a speech to the parliament defending Turkey's foreign policy shifts, when he said, "A new Middle East is about to be born. We will be the owner, pioneer, and servant of this new Middle East. We will manage the wave of change in the Middle East, just as the ideal we have in our minds about Turkey. We have an ideal of a new Middle East." Okay, thank you. I don't have time to go into the details of the recent changes in the new shift, as I call it, in Turkey's foreign policy, from soft power to aspiring warriors. I'm sure that the audience in this room is quite familiar with those. What I would like to do instead of a conclusion will be to emphasize four major areas of tension and contradiction in Neo-Ottomanism as I see it. The first point I will emphasize at length because it is on the question of democracy, and the other ones I will express rather shortly. First, as I said, I would like to talk about the relationship between what I see as imperial delusions in Turkey and democracy, or specifically de-democratization and democratic decline. As Turkey feels more powerful and important in the region and in the world, it treats internal issues of democracy as secondary and sees the alignment, closer alignment with Western foreign policy as a carte blanche in a way, in behaving as it does in internal politics. At a time when the military in Turkey is assumed to be weakening in power, there is a remilitarization of response to the Kurdish issue. After a short period of opening on the Kurdish question in 2009, I believe that Balca will be speaking in more length about this. There has been a remilitarization of policy on the Kurdish issue. As Neo-Ottomanism has so far largely been unsuccessful in taming Kurdish politics through economic development and symbolic recognition of folkloric elements of Kurdish resistance, but not in a recognition of its political elements, The government has taken an approach of securitization and militarization towards Kurds, Kurds who refuse to be assimilated to the political vision of the AKP. Even pro-government Cengiz Çandar has recently acknowledged that the Arab Spring may very well turn into a Turkish autumn, as increased activism in foreign policy could engender increased political repression in Turkey, as the government may stress unity and harmony in its policies internally. In addition to the remilitarization and securitization of its policies on the Kurdish question, there is a very powerful trend toward general repression of political freedoms in Turkey. It's ironic that precisely at a time when Turkey is touted as a model country and a model democracy for the Middle East, it has the highest number of terrorism convictions in the world. As of the end of 2011, Turkey had close to 13,000 convictions, accounting for about 1/3 of the world's total number of terrorism convictions, and far surpassing any other country, including China, with 7,000 convictions in a population of 1.3 billion. This is partly enabled by amendments to anti-terrorism legislation made in 2006, amendments that have allowed very loose, very vague, and very generalized and expanded notions of what constitutes terrorist propaganda, definitions regarding membership of a terrorist organization, as well as changes, amendments that enabled the courts to charge children 18 to 15 as adults. Highly represented among those accused on charges of anti-terrorism are Kurdish children, 15 to 18, that are throwing stones at the police, students who participate in anti-government protests or rallies demanding free education, journalists, intellectuals critiquing government policy, as well as lawyers representing those who are accused of charges of terrorism and so on. What is interesting is that so far Western governments and media are choosing to turn a blind eye to the stark de-democratization in Turkey. In my opinion, the interpretation of this is that this may continue as long as they see Turkey as a useful partner in the present geopolitical context. The second area of contradiction and tension I would like to mention in relation to Neo-Ottomanism is that the delusion of empire is likely going to lead Turkey to overestimating its role and power in the region. As much as the Neo-Ottomans may want to dream about their role as leaders in the Middle East, it is not at all clear whether Arabs and other peoples in the region will necessarily accept Turkey's new self-defined position as an aspirant to empire. For many Arabs and other peoples in the Middle East, memories of the Ottoman past may evoke resentments about a colonial relationship rather than a nostalgic memory of a happy coexistence. A third area of contradiction I would like to mention is that, or contradiction or tension, is that the risks of moving from soft power to outright interventionist politics and strategies in the region can be actually very dangerous. Such a move inevitably increases likelihood of tensions and conflict with neighbors in the region, as Professor Turgay has already summarized. The more it has invested in an escalating war talk, and the more it has supported and armed the opposition in Syria, the more Turkey has moved to a point of no return in its political relations with Syria. At this point, if it cannot effect regime change, Turkey could lose face and credibility as a regional power. On the other hand, if there is a regime change in Syria, it is highly likely that Turkey will be living in a region divided by sectarian and ethnic conflict and will inevitably be affected by these changes. Finally, as a final point, I would like to say that if regime changes in Syria and potentially in Iran are actually accomplished, there are reasons to doubt that Turkey would continue to be supported by Western powers. Two potential challenges may face Turkey. First, it's likely that Western countries and the Western media would start to notice the handling of the Kurdish issue and the creeping repression in Turkey. Second, it would no longer be clear whether Turkey, after that point, be needed or tolerated as a large, populous, strong country and as a regional power. To conclude, I would like to say that it is ironical how the Turkish state is becoming further entrenched in Western imperialism at the very moment when it has developed imperial dreams of its own. It can be argued that Neo-Ottomanism has provided fresh blood for Western imperialism in the Middle East, as it has also provided economic opportunities to the Turkish capitalist class and a possibility of self-aggrandizement for others in Turkey. The recent shift from soft power to more aggressive strategies, however, may put Turkey, as well as the rest of the Middle East, in an increasingly risky and uncertain path. At the present, Turkey may be facing not just a diminished potential for being a regional power, but also an increasingly risky and unstable future internally and abroad. To make a reference to the slogan by Atatürk that Professor Turgay cited, peace at home, peace in the world, being the policy, it seems that the policy at the moment seems to be war at home and war in the world. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Balca Arda, a PhD candidate at York University, who will be talking on the transformation of Islamism in Turkey, the question of the Justice and Development Party, or the AKP.
First, I would like to thank Professor Mogisse and Professor Rahnema for giving me a place in this conference. Okay. I want to thank you again to Professor Mogisse and Professor Rahnema for giving me a place in this conference, and I would like to also thank to all my professors here for their inspiring papers. Following the historical context of Islamic party tradition in Turkey, I want to address in this presentation the crucial shifts in the profile of Islamist party in Turkey with Justice and Development Party, AKP's emergence. I will particularly focus on the complex relation between Islam and capitalism. Throughout this paper, I will use the definition and meaning of the term Islamism and Islamists, as stated by Said, in the sense that Islamism is a political discourse, and as such is similar to other political discourses such as socialism and liberalism. And Islamism is a discourse that attempts to center Islam within the political order. In this sense, Islamism can range from the assertion of a Muslim subjectivity to a full reconstruction of the society on Islamic principles. With the AKP's victory in the general elections in 2002 and in the local election in 2004, the AKP started to control both the great majority of the seats in the Turkish parliament and the great majority of the municipalities of the cities and the towns. AKP won its second electoral victory in 2007 and third one in 2011. In July 2008, AKP marked its exception in the history of former close Islamist parties in Turkey, when the Constitutional Court announced its verdict that there was not enough evidence to close down the AKP. The oppositional People's Republican Party and the Kemalist elite, with the military authorities, accusing the AKP of being a center of anti-secular activities, failed for the first time to down a pro-Islamist party, the AKP. Turkey diligently attempted to appropriate the paradigm of Western modernity at both ideological and symbolical levels. This process that began with the Tanzimat reforms in the 19th century Ottoman Empire and continued in the Kemalist Republic established in 1923. Until the transition to multi-party democracy in the 50s, the religious groups could not have a voice in the political system, while the young republic in Turkey adopted a secular religious policy and subordinated religion under the state, eliminating religious forces that could oppose these policies. So, according to Bobby Said, the Kemalists didn't depoliticize Islam, but by removing it from the center of their construction of their political order, they politicized it, unsettling it and disseminating it into the general culture, where it became available for inscription, reinscription, and reinterpretation. Therefore, the rapid modernization and urbanization enabled the religious masses to be active participants in the system, and the science of the political Islam increased in the 60s. From 1969 to the present, religiously oriented political parties became part of the Turkish political life. The 80s military coup was a turning point in the state relation to Islam. The military government used Sunni Islamic symbols and the organizational resources to down the left, as well as to enhance its legitimacy within Turkish society. The political vacuum that had emerged after the suppression of the socialist left politics by the 80s military coup, in 90s, this political vacuum was easily filled by Islamist politics. In 90s, the Islamist party of that time, namely the Welfare Party, RP, was the major opposition in Turkey with their economic program, which was called the Just Order, Adil Düzen, by the party leader and ideologue Necmettin Erbakan. Socialist John Tual from Berkeley University mentioned that the Just Order was considered widely as a challenge not only to the secular and Kemalist official regime, but to communism and capitalism. The Just Order was presented as an authentically national program, as opposed to the imitation of Western policy programs, Batı taklitleri that Necmettin Erbakan always wants to, likes to say it, and proposed to protect national identity and independence from foreign interventions. From this perspective, the basic characteristic of the tradition, of this old tradition in Turkey for Islamist parties, have been anti-Westernism, anti-Europeanism, and the promise of a community and state based on national and Islamic sources. For instance, the former Islamists before the AKP regarded the UN as a Christian union. As a result, the workers and the poor segments of the society embraced the Just Order as a challenge to capitalism and Western imperialism. The Welfare Party got 7% of the vote in 1987 general elections, 16% of the vote in 1991 elections, and increased their vote to 21% in the 1995 elections. The Welfare Party claimed that it will be both establish a moral sound market economy and protect people from poverty, while also abolishing major inequalities. Thus, with the emphasis on the fight against corruption and informal worker conditions, which were considered by the ordinary workers as the major source of poverty, the Islamists freely combined a leftist language of labor in the past, equality and anti-exploitation to attract workers and poor people's support. Moreover, supported by Islamist sermons and discourses about equality of the rich and the poor before Allah, and significance of the material superiority and insignificance of the material superiority, and new position for the poor community was created in contradistinction from wealthy. And this produced its own power by emphasizing that real status comes from religious knowledge and piety, not from money and comfort. This position contained the seed of a critique of capitalism based on a lifestyle it produces, Yet it also diverted the attention of the poor away from the inequalities of the wealth. Islamic preachers recommends the poor to prefer the small amount of the halal, religious, the licit income, instead of a large amount of haram, religious, illicit, and corrupt money. As a result, a tradition that is based on a both denial of extreme wealth and power and the acceptance of a honest poverty was reproduced in the old Islamist party tradition. Yet, the mobilization of Islamist rhetoric by the AKP is dramatically different than the use of Islamist discourse by its predecessors, the Welfare Party and Virtue Party. There is a radical shift in the welfare regime with the AKP's victory in the general election in 2002 and in local election in 2004. Despite all increases in the unemployment rate and income inequalities, the AKP increased their votes gradually in all elections from 2002 to 2009. At this point, Joan Tual claims that the popular support of the AKP is based on the satisfaction of the ordinary Muslims, including those who were suffering economically, to see the faithful Muslims like them in the government for the first time in the history of the Turkish Republic. To be sure, I agree that the hegemonic self-presentation of the AKP as a good, courageous, faithful Muslim fighting for the right of the ordinary Muslim people against all the injustice and corruption despite of all the obstacles created by the secular Turkish army, secular judiciary, and corrupt secular businesses plays an important role in making support the AKP. However, I think there are more substantial reasons that can explain the rise of the AKP. The most important one of this is the inclusion of the formerly excluded poor populations, poor peasants, and informal workers to the formal network of the government's social aid mechanism, based on the effective distribution of funding provided by Islamic charity organizations through the help of the AKP-led local municipalities. In contrast to the presentation of Islam as an alternative to capitalism and communism during the 90s, with the coming to power of the AKP, the Islamist principles started to be mobilized to support the neoliberalization of the economy and Americanization of the politics. Thus, Tual described the transformation of the Islamist politics as the absorption of the Islamic challenge to capitalism. Although I don't agree with Tual in terms of defining the populist Islamist discourses of the 90s as the substantial challenge to capitalism in practice, I absolutely agree with him that the mobilization of the Islamist rhetoric by the AKP is dramatically different than the use of Islamist discourses by its predecessors, the Welfare and Virtue Party. Unlike the humanitarian conception of the target of the humanitarian intervention as victims who are perpetually dependent on humanitarian aid, the Islamist just order of the former one of Erbakan proposed a national belonging and identity based on the honorable and independent character of the poor. So unlike the humanitarian NGOs that dissociate social problems and specialize in and focus on single issues, the populist discourse of the Islamic just order proposes a complete care and protection for the poor segments of the society in every aspect of their life. However, beginning from 2002, the AKP worked closely with IMF to cut public spending, control wages, roll back agricultural support, and privatize enterprises as well as the natural resources. In Turkey, privatization had been going on for 25 years, okay. But the rise of privatization after the election of AKP in 2002 was dramatic. During this process of neoliberal transformation, the AKP also used Islamic principles, but this time in a different way to support its policies. For instance, Islam's tradition emphasis on passions, sabr, until the otherworldly salvation was articulated to neoliberalism. Moreover, preachers in the mosque started to cite the Islamic rhetoric concerning Allah doesn't like laziness more frequently. So similar to Weberian description of the Protestant ethic as a spirit of capitalism, this time within the context of Islam, working hard was introduced as a part of one's religious faith. while the AKP cut public spending and privatized several public services, they also started to introduce the traditional family structure and the Turkish Islamic thought based on strong beliefs as the pillars for the fight against poverty and difficulties. So, new understanding of social security became making people help each other regarding education, health, and housing. Here, it's a word to state the close relationship of the AKP with the religious sect Nurcu movement, whose leader is Fethullah Gülen. Gülen's movement is now probably the largest civil movement in Turkey. Fethullah Gülen is an Islamic scholar. His followers have established a network of schools within and outside Turkey, whose curriculum is modern and secular, but whose teachers are all members of the religious movement. In Gülen philosophy, Islam and secularity of the state are compatible. In stressing the links between Islam, reason, science, and modernity, and the lack of inherent clash between East and West, the Gülen movement promotes education at all levels and appeals to a cross-section of the Turkish public. Fethullah Gülen right now is living in the USA, and then several schools of Gülen movement are also in the USA. In fact, the Nurcu meetings are a space for the building of like-minded social capital, while Gülen movement don't engage in any direct political action that have influenced the AKP. In Sherif Mardi's analysis, the power of the various Sufi-influenced movements, Nurcu movement is one of them, lay in their ability to provide a sense of meaning and a normative framework at the level of everyday life. Mardin argues that Kemalism, secularism, as the state ideology, was a rather abstract body of enforced public norms sitting on official principles. So Gülen provides us a new one. As a Gülen influence developed within Turkey's provincial middle classes, as eventually among intellectual and urban populations, the broad Nurcu movement emerged as a significant repository of upward mobile social capital waiting to be channeled into a political and also economical project to support AKP's movement. Thus, the new urban class, form of horizontally connected solidarity-based groups with rural origins and shared Islamic ethos, played an important role to bring AKP's victory. These economically and culturally excluded segments of the population by the Kemalist elite utilized Islamic idioms and networks that facilitated this group's integration into a modern opportunity spaces and offered it a hope for social mobilization. This new generation of Muslim economic actors, a new provincial bourgeois, green capital or green bourgeoisie in Kemalist discourse in Turkey, and Anatolian tigers in AKP's discourse, are shaping, in a sense, a new social and cultural landscape in Turkey through Islamic literature, television station, newspaper, and Islamic conception of leisure. They have formed the Istanbul-based independent Muslim Industrialist and Businessmen Association, MÜSİAD, and as well as the Confederation of Turkish Businessmen and Industrialists, TUSKON, directly connected to the Gülen movement to oppose the secular no-rival group, TÜSİAD, big business in general. These two distinct bourgeoisies, secular and green, do not only compete over market share, but more importantly, they compete over the country's ideological and cultural orientation. MÜSİAD and TUSKON, the green bourgeoisie, enthusiastically promote the virtue of free market capitalism, and it has produced an Islamic economic manifesto. Turkish political scientist Hakan Yavuz reports that there are more than 4,000 pro-Islamic corporations in Turkey. About 203 out of the 385 major corporations are owned by interests aligned with Fethullah Gülen. So this is the most enjoyable part, I guess. But how do the supposedly devout Muslims reconcile Islam with capitalism, modernity, and individualism? Green bourgeoisie has promoted distinct tastes, consumer preferences, and transformed religious practice which distinguish the secular bourgeoisie and devout lower classes. In response to those who criticize Islamist bourgeoisie consumerism, the founding chairman of Müsyat, Green Bourgeoisie, Erol Yarar, blamed mystical frugality, validated in Sufi Islam, and its motto, one mouthful food, one short coat, as the source of laziness and lack of motivation toward the world, and it is the main cause of backwardness in Muslim world. In this sense, the green bourgeoisie is engaged to blur the line of demarcation between needs and luxury that determines the limits of consumption in Islam. For instance, Şebnem Gümüşlü mentions that Müsyat fairs host stylish brands of Ottoman-style furniture and decoration, whereas realtors in these fairs sell luxurious residence overlooking the Kaaba in Mecca. In Ramadan, they eat their iftar after sunset feast in five-star hotels or fancy restaurants. Fashionization of the veil replaced concern for religious piety and observance with a concern for beauty and style. In so doing, they turned the brand of one's headscarf into a sign of one's status. So, in brief, the example of the AKP vis-à-vis the former Islamist party in Turkey showed that Islamic principles can be present either as an alternative to capitalism or as a support to neoliberalism, depending on the social and political and historical context. Therefore, one cannot argue that the rise of Islamic movements is merely a reaction to the rise of the neoliberalism. The relation between the rise of Islamic movement and the rise of neoliberalism is much more complex. So in the international level, to relate to my professor's comments on the Neo-Ottomanism, while gradually the politics of religion dominate the global public sphere, Turkey, with a foreign policy guided by Neo-Ottomanism, seems to present a qualified moderator in the new Middle East emerged after the Arab Spring movements. Consequently, the AKP and its foreign policy that privatized the Muslim world without being anti-Western and anti-capitalist do not contradict but mostly support USA's interest in the region. All in all, the above-mentioned properties of the AKP and the current circumstances in the international arena present how the AKP becomes an example of successful Islamic party as opposed to the tradition of the failure of the former Islamist party in Turkey. Thank you.
My question goes to you, Sedef, right? Okay. Thank you for your presentation. I have a few questions. First, you said if Syria and Iranian regime are changed, then Turkey becomes the regional power. And then the Western imperialism will not tolerate Turkey. First, why? Why they don't tolerate Turkey? Second, why do you think that if Iranian regime and Syrian regime are changed, there would not be better regime in their place, more stronger, democratic, with total freedom for people, and then move on to be more powerful than Turkey. Second, in your analysis, you said Turkey succeeded to be almost a regional power under AKP leadership. How do you explain this? How come they succeeded to be a regional power and Iran and other countries in the region couldn't be? Is there any secret for this party or this government succeeded to be in that position? And even you go further to say if Iranian regime and Syrian regime are changed, then Turkey will be even more powerful? What's the secret behind this? And thirdly, why the Western imperialism does not intend to change Turkey's regime today. And they intend to change Iranian regime and Syrian regime and Gaddafi's regime in Libya. What's the reason, according to your analysis?
Thank you very much. Can I move to the other two questions?
Sure.
And then we will have the answers. So there is Minu Deraye and one more question here, and then there. Shall I collect all the questions first?
So I turn to you. You're using the term Ottomanism. And we have the Ottoman Empire for almost 400 or 500 years. I was wondering, how come you don't use the term Islamism instead of Ottomanism? Is there any specific reason other than the fact that the Ottomans were imperialists of the time? Instead of using new imperialist, Islamist, or Islamic-oriented movement in Turkey? That was my question. I just want to know more. And I also wanted to pose a question concerning the, you raised the question about the democratic nature of this Islamic government in Turkey. The fact that it does not respect the Kurdish issue. But I think the whole issue of women was somehow undermined. The whole talk of the Sharia issue and the new statement of the Prime Minister concerning abortion. So I just wanted to have your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Well, first of all, before my question, Professor Rahnama and Professor Morisi, I would like, on behalf of actually the observers, if I may actually, would like to thank you for the last fruitful 2 days, and including today. We learned a lot, and the entire conference was so engaging and fascinating, full of so many fantastic observations and things that we were always had as a question in our mind. And I am looking forward very much to the text being published so that we can get a full understanding of the entire views and opinions that has been expressed here for the last few days. So we are very much looking forward to that. My question to the Turkish delegation, let's put it this way, is you're referring to the Neo-Ottoman doctrine. Could you enlighten us about the founders of the new Ottoman doctrine, and specifically if there are any names, individuals, or a specific, let's say, organization who could be attributed to this new doctrine? Thank you.
I think we have learned from history, although there are many historians around, I should be very careful what I say. From the time of the the last phase of Abbasid Empire, we learned that when an empire is getting weak, although I don't believe that Americans are at that stage yet, but with the mess that they created in the Middle East, they have no other choice but to allow several regional powers to grow, some by will, some without having the choice. And these three are Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. No doubt, I think it's a brilliant point to say that Turkey is taking advantage of this, expanding it. Saudi Arabia shamelessly is doing the same thing by other means. And Iranian regime also is doing it. So these are the realities that Americans are facing. This is a very complicated situation, and Americans have no choice. In addition to that, I have one question that we did not deal. The economic consequences of hostile relationship with Syria has been too much for Turkey, because not only Turkey is losing much of the market in Syria, but also in Jordan. Much of the transportation, much of the system, many of the industries of Jordan and Syria also developed in relation to that. And I think still I do not really understand why the present government in Turkey became all of a sudden hostile to the Syrian regime. This is a very complicated issue.
Well, very quickly, because we don't have time, but well, I'll start with, or actually address my point to Balca. I have two PhD students working on, two Turkish PhD students working on the same issue of the AKP and all that, but they have a very different view from the one you expressed as far as I understood you. They both stress the fact that the distinction, or the, let's say, the clash between the Anatolian, or whatever term is used, capital, and the big capital in Turkey has been superseded after 2001, after the crisis in 2001. And AKP is seen by both of them as the product of the merge of these interests in one party. And this is what explains, in their view, actually, the success of AKP in holding power, and even in, for the first time, being able to cut out the military control of power that existed in Turkey since Mustafa Kemal. So I would very much urge you to, if you're interested, I can put you in touch with them. But I mean, they are both economists, and it's based on. You can also put them in touch with Balca. Yes, of course, yeah. No, because what she's saying is very classical, if you want. It's not original in that sense, this issue of Musyad, Tusyad, and all that. And what they are stressing is that this kind of divergence has been superseded since 10 years after the crisis of 2001, the huge leap in the privatization and all that. There has been a merge in these interests, which is represented by the AKP, which they see the AKP as actually, and the success of Erdogan, and the fact that actually all key sections of Turkish capitalism basically supported Erdogan over the last years. And finally, well, I think that the category that was used for some other countries like Brazil, South Africa in the past, and all that, of sub-imperialism, applies very much to Turkey, which I see as a sub-imperialist country, not a challenger of US imperialism, but really a kind of regional major ally of the United States, as the Shah of Iran used to be also at some time, although economically it's not the same. But in the Turkish case, the whole concept, including the dimension of the economic dimension, I think is present.
Thanks. My question is to the panel as a whole, whoever would like to discuss it. When one thinks about the basis for Turkish influence in the Middle East, it seems to me that while walking out on the Israeli leader, was very popular and it was applauded all over the Arab world, and I was amazed to see Iraqis starting to wear the Turkish, football jersey whenever Turkey plays. All of that is very interesting, but it seems to me that one can only get so far by appealing to cultural affinities and visions of a past grandeur. What is the economic foundation of this new aggressive Turkish hegemony or attempts at hegemony? I know that, for example, when Erdogan came to Baghdad, he came with a huge team of entrepreneurs and economic advisors and so forth, and they signed all kinds of contracts. Is there really such a solid economic base that could support Turkish ambitions of greater influence in the Middle East, or is this this whole talk of a strong Turkish economy a little bit exaggerated? I mean, I've read contradicting views on this. You know, on the one hand, there is some very interesting indicators of a booming economy and a rising aggressive bourgeoisie. On the other hand, it seems to show the same symptoms of very high debt, a bubble on the verge of being burst, and a bourgeoisie that still remains rather limited in its capability. So I'm wondering, you know, I don't know the answer to this. I'm wondering what your opinion on this is.
Yes, my questions also are addressed to all of you in the panel, and I thank you also. It was very articulate and interesting overview. And but the only, I mean, both question and comment is that again, it looks like you are starting as if the center of the world is this almighty, omnipresent American imperialism, and there's no agency, no independence, no initiative on the part of anybody else, and whatever is being done, there is some kind of conspiracy or alignment made already. That is a little still, I can't really, I mean, it's still problematic to me. As Said said, the same is happening. Any regional power or any country with especially previous imperialist history, like Iran, Turkey, naturally want to expand its power. It's in the nature of capitalism, nature of political ambition of these governments. So same is happening in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in Turkey, and but the question is why Turkey is succeeding, and also another thing that I don't understand, which is the way that you, especially Balca, was explaining. What is the surprising news here that we are finding out that these Islamists who claim piety and everything, but at the same time they are very successful bourgeois. I mean, Maxim Rodinson years ago well argued that capitalism is compatible with Islam. And so why are we surprised? Yeah, I mean, Muhammad was a big merchant himself. So, I mean, what are the... Yeah, he was hired by a bourgeois woman. Bourgeois, not real modern bourgeois, but a merchant. So Iran, despite all this claim for mustazafin, look how rich they have become, the government and the ruling class in Iran. So what is...
Just like what I generally heard from the public sphere here in Canada or the international level is just like always that Turkey's version of the Islam is the best one. Why it is the best one is just like why it changed. Before the our former Islamist parties were always, you know, how can I say, blame it in a way to be, you know, old stylish, and then it's just like right now, not suddenly, but, you know, in a way that right now our Islamist model became the best one that Middle East can get, okay? And then why it is just like that? Because it's a real neoliberal one. And then also supporting the, you know, most of the, you know, already settled down, you know, powers there. Is why it is just like that. I have to say this. I need to say this because all of my students, I am a teaching assistant, is just like coming to me and then saying that, you know, this is your model. You are from Turkey, so that you don't look like a Muslim, but, you know, you have to be Muslim, things like that. It's just why it is changing, how AKP became a model in public sphere, in global public sphere, it is because of that. And then it has to be, you know, largely pronounced. What is the behind scene of this? So it is basically because of that. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, good. No, I don't need that. I think my voice is better now.
No.
Oh, they have a question. Oh, yes. Yes.
No, you have it.
Let me first make a couple of remarks about the economy. Turkish economy is, yes, very strong. Current debt is high, but it's still manageable. And long-term external debt, they are paying very slowly, but very successfully. Since mid-1990s, Turkey's gross domestic product quadrupled, which is very important. Exports increased fivefold in 20 years. Direct foreign investment by a factor of 25, and the value of the stocks traded in the Istanbul Stock Exchange by the factor of 40. Turkish economy is very broadly based. It's not the traditional economy that, yes, it's important, export of cotton, export of hazelnuts, export of tobacco, export of dry fruit. No. Every single conceivable household equipment, cars, television sets, is exported to Eastern Europe, textile, fruit, food products, canned and fresh, exported to Europe, exported to Middle East, certainly, exported indeed to Asia. Government is keen on supporting export, not necessarily giving subsidy, but supporting. So that broad-based Turkish economy and very productive people, I must say, and entrepreneur people, gave tremendous impact, tremendous push to Turkish economy, and the economy can support it. Economy, I think, can support Turkish expansion into markets. I'm not saying political expansion. Not very many things can support that. That is one. As far as, and let me comment also very briefly on the power of the AK Party, Erdogan's party. Well, first of all, Turks are Muslims. There is no way you can separate a Turk from that cultural Islam. He might be a secular. Sure, drink 10 times a day. Never pray. Hate to go to mosque. Doesn't know how to pray. Doesn't matter. He is culturally a Muslim. It's very seldom that you can call somebody a Turk and you won't even ask a question, are you a Muslim? So Islam is very much in the spirit of a Turk. These people very gently, Erdogan and his crowd, very gently, very carefully address the innermost emotions of people through action. Because keep in mind, many of these people came from municipal service. They know. For example, those very important and really are very, very important and beautiful things in Islam. Helping a widow, helping an orphan, helping a traveler, that the poor will have a share in the wealth of the rich one. They talk about these things. They practice these things. They arrange and pay for marriages of young people who cannot afford it. They pay for funeral expenses of people who are poor. They provide certain food and some other services, not only during election time, through their organization almost consistently. So they are attracted by middle class and also lower middle class. Very careful, very careful. In the meantime, they are not speaking against modernity. They are not saying a person should not swim here, swim there. But in Turkey today, poor Mustafa Kemal, he'll be turning in his grave. There are places for women to swim, there are places for men to swim. You don't get together. There are hotels for women, there are hotels for men. So Erdogan, I mean, they are Muslims, don't make any mistake about it. And how far can they carry this liberal approach is a question in my mind. For example, recently, Erdogan made lots of statements, but recently he said, they were talking about the Kurdish problem, separation, etc. He said, hey, this is a nation of one flag, one name, and one religion. One religion. People, now this is a far cry from a few years ago when a synagogue in Turkey was bombed and a number of people died, but 6 of them were Jews. Despite the protection, somebody was able to bomb the synagogue. And Turkey held a state funeral for those 6 Jews. And at the top of their coffin, Turkish flag. Now, you cannot have Iranian flag at the top of that. You cannot have La ilaha illallah flag at the top of that. But the secular Turkish flag covered them. To me, it was a very moving issue. They were citizens of Turkish Republic. Now, although you don't find a push that they stop drinking here, they stop drinking there, slowly and slowly, institutions are being affected, especially the last remarks by Erdogan, that abortion and cesarean are sin. Cesarean, why? Because he has been talking about you must have, each family in Turkey must have 3 children. We can support it. He went to Kazakhstan and told the president there, Turkey, 3 children, but you guys, you need 5. Now, and somebody suggested, immediately after him, one of his friends in the parliament, and said, even those women who are raped must deliver their baby. Don't worry, government can take care of that. Slowly and slowly, step by step, Islam is getting hold. Now, where does Islam stop once it enters politics? No one can guess. No one can guess. It's not like, and there's no secular Muslim. Really. There are those of us who practice Islam culturally, respect Islam, etc. But secular Islam, what secular Islam? And one more point, when Mustafa Kemal in 1923 established a republic, the first thing they did in the parliament building, in the hall, is hakimiyet bila kaydu şart milletindir. Sovereignty unconditionally belongs to the people. He took the authority from God, gave it to the Turkish people, despite his dictatorship for the few years. Now we have the same thing in modern Turkish. I mean, again, the same thing in Turkish, modern Turkish. However, is the spirit there? Thank
you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, my first question answered by Mr. Uner about the character of Erdogan. He said, this is the typical Erdogan. I think you explained it, yeah. My second question to Sedef. You talk about the nostalgia to the past. Is it just on the political elite or it is rooted in the society? Because I read the Abraham book about Istanbul. There is a nostalgia rooted in the book to the past. Is it part of the society way of thinking and how it exploded in the way of the society, or just its political design for the new Ottoman Empire?
Can I make a quick comment on this?
Afterwards, Professor Mujab has a question, and then I'll take the mic to the speakers, and then people come.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I really would like to appreciate deeply all the presenters because I think that it is Turkey is a very important case, and I think, as Sedef mentioned, the tensions and contradictions are very important for us to pay attention to, and it gives us a place to rethink imperialism, the role of imperialism in the region. And especially with the question, as a close observer and participant in the Kurdish struggle of Turkey, I know that right now the suppression of the Kurds is very much related to a deep class analysis that you are doing, especially Balca and Sedef, on the rise of the bourgeoisie. And as you know, Sedef, that we had the panel at the historical materialism where another student from York, actually, an MA student, Elif Genç, did a beautiful analysis, the class analysis of the Kurdish parties, the relationship between the rise of the bourgeoisie of the Kurdish population to the suppression of the political scene that it is happening in Turkey. Last month only, 29 mayors, majority of them very young women in the Turkish, in the Kurdish region, have been imprisoned, and including 600 of the students that are all in prison right now. What I would like you to address, because I know that you both most probably are very familiar with that, is the suppression, the political suppression that it is going on right in Turkey is very much related to this very notion that you're introducing, Sedef, as the role of Turkey as a sub-imperialist in the region, as well as the rise of this new Ottomanism, and so the economic power. So I think that as part of these tensions and contradictions, on the one hand, we have the rise of this bourgeoisie, the rise of economic power. On the other hand, we have a huge political suppression, not only of the Kurds, but also the unions, women's groups, and which is and you're absolutely right that in my other work on political prisoners, I know that the rise of political prisoners in Turkey is a very serious issue, and it has one of the highest numbers of prisons of conscience in the region. So I think class analysis, the rethinking of the notion of imperialism in the region, and the relationship of all of this with the Turkey coming into an economic power in the region. These are all part of these tensions and contradictions that we need to discuss. Thank you.
It's been several different questions, and I don't have time to address them perhaps adequately, but I'll try my best. I want to start out by the point that Naira made about the notion of Turkey is a country that's subcontracting itself to Western imperialism, that Western imperialism is still all-powerful and determining things. I recognize that it would be rather too simplistic and too deterministic to interpret things purely as a relationship of subcontracting. There is no question that there are internal forces, internal actors, and politics in Turkey that aspires towards a neo-empire. And it is important to recognize that agency. At the same time, however, I would like to say that as these interests might be converging, the interest between certain internal actors and external Western imperialism might be converging at the moment. It's not clear how long that convergence will last, and it's not clear whether that will be a stable relationship between the two. It is very possible that once Turkey is seen to be challenging certain interests, that Western powers will take a different kind of relationship to Turkey. And this also relates to the question that Professor Alamdari raised about why AKP has become a regional power, what is the secret, why Western imperialism does not challenge the Turkish regime, but perhaps some other regimes and so on. I do think that that convergence is indeed very important in the toleration of these aspirations for empire in Turkey, because it's not, you don't see the same kind of relationship to other empire aspirants. I mean, certainly the discourse on China, for example, in the West is very different than the discourse on Turkey and so on. But I also want us to never forget the history of the Cold War, because now we sometimes there's a tendency in Turkey to rewrite history in a major way, and we start depicting some other actors as necessarily national actors, for example, the military. And I actually think that especially the two military coups in Turkey, the 1971 and the 1980 military coups, would actually not have succeeded and legitimized if there was not the external support during the Cold War for those interventions. The 1960 coup was of a different nature, so I won't talk about that. Professor Alamdari also asked a question about why did I say that Western imperialism may not tolerate Turkey if there is indeed a regime change in Syria and Iran. I actually believe that part of the so-called Greater Middle East project is actually to get rid of any big and strong states in the Middle East, and to reduce perhaps most states in the Middle East to Iraq. Separate them on the basis of ethnicity and religion and sect, and it's much easier to rule the Middle East that way than dealing with independent nation states. That's my theory. And on the other question that you raised about why there would not necessarily be better regimes in their place if there is regime change in Syria and Iran, I personally think that the peoples of the countries, not external forces, and whether it's Turkish Neo-Ottomans or Western imperialism, should dictate change. I think there needs to be a self-determination, and we have seen what has happened in Iraq. So I think that one of the reasons why part of the Syrian population is continuing to support the regime is precisely because they are so afraid of the same things happening to themselves as what they have seen in Iraq, the sectarianism and the bloodbath, which nobody wants, obviously. And that's, I believe, what external intervention would lead to. That's what it looks like at the moment. The question that Minu raised, thank you for bringing that up. I think that was a major gap in my discussion of democracy, the question of women. I personally think that AKP, the leading party, has been rather slow in moving on the question of women. But as Professor Turgay has said, and as you have pointed out, some of this recent discussion on abortion is certainly leading in that direction, is certainly indicating that it's leading in that direction. I actually want to challenge some of the preconceptions of AKP's policies on women. I actually think that they have been extremely shy and opportunistically cautious in not supporting, for example, women in headscarves entering the university until the last couple of years. In the first several years of them being in power, they chose not to assert that issue, as they were very assertive on a number of different issues. So I actually think that they do have a conservative agenda, but certainly it's not in the form of empowering necessarily women in headscarves to enter universities and public space. Now, I think I have perhaps addressed most of the questions. Professor Al Jazeera raised a question about nostalgia. I think that, as I said, I mean, most Turks were happy for many decades, I believe, in just becoming a part of a nation state and not necessarily aspiring to empire. Yes, certain Neo-Ottoman sentiments did exist in parts of the population, some narrow conservative circles, but they were never popularized. But more recently, I think the nostalgia has gone much beyond the elite. There is now a popularization of this in the form of popular cultures, TV series, new films, certain architectural forms that are becoming romanticized and so on. So there is a popularization of this. There was a question on what the sources of Neo-Ottomanism are. I don't want to suggest that it is a completely new thing. And even in terms of state policy, Neo-Ottomanism, in fact, has also been attributed to Prime Minister Özal in the 1980s and the early 1990s. And in some ways, you can argue he was somebody who pursued some of those aspirations. But the main ideologue recently of Neo-Ottomanism has been the Davutoğlu, who has become the foreign minister since. In response, okay.